What happens when privilege meets real justice? Watch closely as a spoiled socialite walks into a courtroom, expecting special treatment, but meets a judge who doesn't play games. What happens next is a lesson she won't forget. The courtroom was full that morning, filled with quiet whispers as people found their seats. It was a regular day at the Los Angeles County Courthouse, except today's hearing had people talking. Tiffany Halstead, a wealthy socialite known for wild behavior and a sky-high ego, was scheduled to appear before Judge William Grant. Judge Grant had a solid reputation, a calm, smart man known for being fair, but tough. Tiffany showed up the way she always did, late without apology, dressed head to toe in designer clothes, her large sunglasses hiding most of her face. She strolled into the room, as if it were a fashion show, not a court hearing. Her lawyer followed behind her nervously, clearly wishing she'd tone it down. The usually quiet and respectful courtroom went silent. All eyes turned to her as she stood in the aisle, acting like she didn't notice or care, that she was keeping everyone waiting. With a lazy flick of her wrist, she told her lawyer to move so she could put her handbag on the bench. She pulled off her sunglasses with a dramatic flair, scanning the room like it wasn't worth her time. Then Judge Grant walked in. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The whispers stopped. People straightened in their seats. Judge Grant, in his mid-50s, stood tall with a quiet but strong presence. He gave the room a quick look, then calmly took his seat. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Tiffany rolled her eyes and stood up with an annoyed sigh, as if this whole thing were beneath her. Judge Grant didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his glasses, opened the folder in front of him, and started the session. The charges were basic: a bunch of unpaid parking tickets, and a reckless driving incident that nearly hurt a pedestrian. It could have been a routine case. But Tiffany's attitude was about to make it anything but. As the judge read the charges, Tiffany slouched in her chair, crossed her arms, and rolled her eyes, a clear sign of disrespect. That didn't escape Judge Grant's notice, but he said nothing about it. He kept going, calm and controlled, as if daring her to keep up the act. You could feel the tension rise. Even the most regular court visitors sat straighter, sensing something serious was coming. But Tiffany, clueless to the warning signs, wasn't about to back down. She shifted again, her annoyance growing with every word the judge said. She began tapping her perfectly polished nails on the wooden table, loud enough to distract others. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but she waved him off like he was a nuisance. The room, already tight with tension, seemed to freeze. When Judge Grant asked her to confirm her name, she barely looked up. "Yeah, that's me," she muttered, full of attitude. A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Judge Grant's face stayed calm, but his eyes lingered on her, just a little longer than before. "Miss Halstead," he said, his voice steady and clear. "In this courtroom, we expect a certain level of respect. I suggest you change your tone." Tiffany gave a smug smile, as if the judge had just told a joke. She leaned back, twisting a strand of her blonde hair in her fingers. "Sure thing, Your Honor," she said, her voice thick with sarcasm. Gasps echoed quietly around the room. Even the court reporter paused for a second before typing again. Tiffany's own lawyer dropped his head in his hands, embarrassed beyond belief. Judge Grant, however, stayed calm. "Miss Halstead," he said once more, his voice firmer now, "do you understand the charges brought against you today?" Tiffany rolled her eyes again, this time adding a loud sigh. "Honestly? No," she said. "It's just some dumb parking tickets." "And what?" Someone freaked out. "Because I pressed the gas too hard? This is a waste of time." The courtroom went completely still. All eyes turned to Judge Grant, who quietly closed a folder in front of him. He removed his glasses and set them down on the bench with care. For a second, it felt like the whole room had frozen in place. "Miss Halstead," he said slowly, his voice calm but heavy with meaning, "I suggest you choose your words wisely. From this point on," His tone made even the most distracted spectators sit up and pay attention. But Tiffany, still unaware of the storm building, just shrugged. "What?" she said. "It's true. It's not like I hurt anyone. This is just ridiculous." What Tiffany didn't realize was that the mood in the room had shifted. Her words were no longer being ignored. Judge Grant didn't respond right away, but his silence spoke louder than any outburst. He leaned back slightly, his sharp gaze locked on Tiffany. The courtroom stayed quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Even Tiffany's lawyer, who had been flipping nervously through papers, paused to glance up at the judge. "You believe this is ridiculous, Miss Halstead?" Judge Grant asked, his voice steady and calm, almost like casual conversation. He didn't raise his voice, but it was clear he was in control. Tiffany scoffed. "Yeah, I do. I mean, it's not like I robbed a bank or something. This is just way over the top." She waved her hand, as if brushing the whole thing away. Judge Grant nodded slowly, resting his hands together on the bench. "I see," he said quietly. His calmness only added to the suspense. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing something big was coming. "Let me make something clear to you, Miss Halstead," he said, his tone still firm and steady. "The charges aren't just about reckless driving. They include putting someone's life in danger. And the law doesn't judge a case by how big the crime seems, but by the damage it causes. Do you understand that?" Tiffany rolled her eyes yet again, muttering, Sure, whatever you say." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence, everyone heard it. Judge Grant didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. A pause hung in the air, the kind that lets everyone know something serious is about to happen. "Miss Halstead," Judge Grant said, his voice just as calm, "do you remember the event 2 weeks ago? The reason you're sitting here now?" Tiffany shrugged, looking bored. "Some guy stepped off the curb. I honked, he moved. End of story." The judge raised his eyebrows. "End of story?" he repeated. "Yeah," Tiffany said, crossing her arms. "No harm, no foul." But Judge Grant wasn't finished. He reached for a file, flipped through it slowly, and then looked out at the courtroom. "Let the record show," he said, his voice firm and clear, "that the pedestrian in question, Mr. Edward Lopez, is a 67-year-old retired schoolteacher. He was crossing the street legally when Miss Halstead accelerated toward him, causing him to stumble and injure his wrist. He has required medical treatment and continues to experience pain." Tiffany's smug smile faded for the first time. She glanced at her lawyer, who whispered something quietly, but she brushed him off again. "I didn't hit him," she muttered. "He's fine." Judge Grant turned his full attention back to her. "Miss Halstead," he said, "does that sound like no harm, no foul to you?" Before Tiffany could respond, Judge Grant made sure she and everyone else understood the seriousness of the moment. His voice stayed calm, but there was power in every word. "Miss Halstead, what concerns me most isn't just the nature of the charges against you. It's your attitude, your unwillingness to accept responsibility for your actions." Tiffany leaned back again, pretending not to care, but the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. "Look," she said, "I told you I didn't hit him. People are just too dramatic these days." That comment drew a few shocked gasps from the people watching. Judge Grant tapped his pen lightly against the desk. He paused and spoke again. "Dramatic?" he repeated quietly. "Well then, Miss Halstead, would you like to hear from Mr. Lopez himself? Because he's here today, in this courtroom." The room grew still again. Tiffany's confident look started to crack. Her eyes flicked toward the gallery, where a man in the second row, Mr. Lopez, sat quietly with his arm in a sling. His face showed no anger, only a calm disappointment that somehow hurt more than any harsh words could. Tiffany shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, but still trying to hold her ground. "I'm sure he's fine," she mumbled, though her voice had lost its usual edge. Judge Grant leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the room. Miss Halstead, your lack of concern for this man's pain says a lot about you. But this case isn't just about him. It's about what kind of example we set when people with wealth and privilege think they don't have to answer for what they've done. The room was so silent, you could hear the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Every eye was on Judge Grant, waiting for what he would say next. And then, with a calm that made the moment feel even heavier, he said, "Since you seem so unconcerned about the consequences of your actions, maybe it's time you experience them for yourself." Tiffany blinked, her bold attitude beginning to crack. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, a hint of real worry creeping into her voice. Judge Grant didn't reply right away. Instead, he motioned to the bailiff, who handed him a few papers. The judge began reading them aloud. Lists of fines, mandatory community service, and court-ordered sensitivity training that Tiffany would now be required complete. But it wasn't the punishments themselves that stunned the courtroom. It was how Judge Grant delivered them, wrapping each one in a powerful message about privilege, empathy, and the duty we all share as members of society. And then came the part that truly caught Tiffany and everyone else off guard. Judge Grant placed the papers down slowly, his eyes locked on Tiffany. The room felt heavy, as if everyone could feel the weight of what he was about to say, even before he said it. "Miss Halstead," he began, "I've reviewed your case thoroughly. Given the seriousness of your behavior and your clear lack of responsibility, I'm giving you a sentence that I hope will offer more than just punishment. I hope it offers perspective." Tiffany sat up straighter, her smirk gone, replaced by nervous curiosity. "Perspective?" she repeated, barely believing what she was hearing. "Yes," Judge Grant replied. "In addition to the fines and the 200 hours of community service, you will spend the next 30 days volunteering at the downtown women's shelter. You will work face-to-face with people who have gone through real hardship, many of whom are struggling through no fault of their own. Maybe then you'll understand the damage that comes from carelessness and entitlement." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. This wasn't a typical sentence, and reactions varied. Some nodded with approval. Others exchanged shocked looks. But all attention was on Tiffany. "You've got to be kidding me," she snapped, her voice rising. "You want me to do what? Hang out with homeless people? That's not my problem." Judge Grant didn't flinch, but his voice turned colder. "Miss Halstead, that exact attitude is why you're sitting in front of me today. Your behavior shows a complete lack of awareness of how your actions affect others. This isn't a punishment. It's a chance to grow. And let me be clear, if you refuse to cooperate, you will face a much harsher sentence." Her lawyer tugged gently at her sleeve, trying to calm her, but Tiffany yanked her arm away. "This is crazy. You can't make me do this," she snapped. Judge Grant calmly raised his hand, quieting the room again. "This court has every right," he said, "to assign community service as part of your sentence. You will report to the shelter at 8 a.m. each morning. Your progress will be monitored by a supervisor and reviewed weekly. If you fail to follow the terms, you'll be back in this courtroom, and next time under much worse circumstances." A hush fell over the room. Judge Grant's words hung in the air, leaving everyone silent. Tiffany's face turned red with anger, but for once, she didn't argue. She sat frozen, stunned, completely unsure of what to say. But it wasn't over. Judge Grant adjusted his glasses, his expression calm and firm. Even though Tiffany still looked defiant, he gave the silence time to sink in, knowing his next words would leave a lasting mark. "Miss Halstead," he said, "this courtroom doesn't exist to shame or embarrass anyone. It exists to uphold justice and, whenever possible, to teach. Your privilege has protected you from the real consequences of your actions, and because of that, you've lost the ability to see others with empathy. This isn't about punishment. It's about giving you the chance to reconnect with your humanity." You could hear a pin drop. Everyone was holding their breath. Tiffany, clearly uncomfortable now, glanced at the spectators. Her tough exterior was beginning to fade. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but stopped herself. "Do you know what Mr. Lopez said when he was asked how he felt about you?" Judge Grant asked, his voice now gentle, almost conversational. Tiffany shook her head, then glanced toward Mr. Lopez, who still sat quietly in the second row, his arm in a sling, his expression soft but sad. The judge continued. He said, "I don't want her to suffer. I just want her to understand. Because if she doesn't, she'll keep hurting people. And someday it might be something she can't undo." The words hit like a punch. Tiffany's face went pale. Her usual confidence seemed to drain away. For the first time, her pride was replaced by something else. Discomfort, maybe even guilt. Judge Grant wasn't finished. "Mr. Lopez, the man you nearly injured, has shown more grace than anger. He could have demanded tougher consequences, but instead, he asked for something better, a chance for you to learn. That's what this sentence is meant to be." Tiffany shifted again in her chair, her posture no longer defiant, but uncertain. The courtroom was completely still. Every little sound, the turn of a page, the creak of a bench, felt loud in the quiet. "You'll report to the women's shelter on Monday morning." Judge Grant continued. "There, you'll meet women who face challenges you can't even imagine. Some have lost everything. Some are just starting to rebuild their lives. You will listen to their stories. And as you do, I hope you begin to understand what it means to be humble and take responsibility for your actions." Tiffany looked like she wanted to argue, but the weight of the moment kept her silent. Her lawyer gently placed a hand on her arm, urging her to stay quiet. But even as Judge Grant's words began to settle in, Tiffany's real lesson was just beginning, a lesson that would start outside, the safe, privileged world she had always known. With a sharp crack of the gavel, Judge Grant brought the hearing to an end. "This court is adjourned," he declared, rising from his seat and walking out. The air in the courtroom was still heavy, like the calm after a storm that had left its mark. Tiffany stayed seated, her face frozen between disbelief and pride. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering quickly, but she barely responded. People began leaving, their quiet conversations filling the room. Mr. Lopez stood carefully, his arm still in a sling, a quiet reminder of why they were all there. As he passed by Tiffany, he looked at her, his expression calm, not angry, but firm. She didn't meet his eyes. She stared down at the table. Outside, a crowd of reporters was waiting. Tiffany's name, already known from tabloid headlines, was now attached to a courtroom moment everyone seemed to be talking about. Cameras flashed as she stepped out, her lawyer shielding her from the rush of questions. "Miss Halstead, do you have a comment about the judge's decision? Do you feel the sentence was fair? Will you be complying with the community service?" For a moment, Tiffany's old arrogance returned. "No comment," she snapped, pushing through the crowd and into a waiting car. But once the doors shut and the noise of the reporters faded, her shoulders slumped. Reality had started to settle in. That evening, the story topped headlines everywhere. Clips of the hearing, especially Judge Grant's remarks, spread quickly online. People on social media shared their thoughts. Many praised the judge for his fairness. Others criticized Tiffany's attitude. But one message stood out above all. Mr. Lopez gave a quiet statement outside the courthouse. "I don't want her to fail," he said. "I just hope she learns. Because when we stop learning, we stop growing. And that's when we really lose." His words struck a deep chord. Simple, powerful. They echoed far beyond the courtroom walls. For Tiffany, though, the real lesson was just starting. Monday came with a chill she hadn't felt in a long time, in the air and in her heart. She stood outside the downtown women's shelter, her large sunglasses hiding her uncertainty. The building was plain, but full of life. Volunteers and staff moved quickly, each with something to do. For the first time in years, Tiffany felt out of place. Inside, the sound of voices, laughter, and dishes clinking welcomed her. A woman in her 40s with a kind but firm face approached her. "You must be Tiffany," she said. "Welcome. Let's get you started." The first few hours passed slowly. Tiffany helped prepare food, serve meals, and clean the dining area. She said little, her usual attitude stripped away, in this unfamiliar setting. But as the day wore on, she started noticing things, like the thankful smiles from those receiving food, the teamwork among the staff, and the quiet strength in the stories she overheard. Over lunch, a woman, a single mother with 3 children, shared her journey with Tiffany. "You think you know what matters," she said, meeting Tiffany's eyes. "But life has a way of showing you what really does." That night, driving home, Tiffany was quiet, lost in thought. She couldn't stop thinking about the people she'd met, the lives so different from hers, and the words Judge Grant had spoken. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to life than luxury, appearances, and control. In the weeks that followed, her required service continued. Bit by bit, the walls she'd built around herself began to fall. She listened more, spoke less, and slowly, something inside her began to shift. By the time she returned to court to complete her sentence, Tiffany was different, quieter, more thoughtful. She stood before Judge Grant once more. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and sincere, "for not giving up on me." Judge Grant nodded, his face softening just slightly. "The real thanks," he replied, "will be in how you use what you've learned to make a difference." As Tiffany walked out of the courthouse, the sun bright overhead, she carried with her something new, a quiet but powerful hope, a second chance, not just to change her actions, but to change the way she saw the world. Tiffany's story became a reminder for everyone that true change is possible, but it takes humility, courage, and the strength to face our own flaws. What about you? What will you do today to open your heart to the lessons life is trying to teach? If the story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that inspire growth, reflection, and change.